Welcome, you're watching Vox News, your daily evening news with Rita Kamkumo. Our headlines today: Malawi's electoral chief Jane Ansah resigns a month before the presidential election rerun. Egypt agrees to resume talks with Sudan and Ethiopia over the filling of the controversial Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. The Tanzanian government announces the reopening of universities despite the virus silence controversy. Our top story today: Malawi's disputed chairperson of the Electoral Commission, Dr. Jane Ansah, announced her resignation on Thursday evening, a month before the presidential election rerun, following the cancellation for fraud of President Peter Mutharika's re-election last year. The opposition and civil society have been calling for Mrs. Ansah's dismissal for months, accusing her of covering up the irregularities that led to the re-election of the outgoing head of state in May 2019 for his second term, to the detriment of opposition leader Lazarus Chakwera. Mrs. Ansah denied having covered up any fraud during last year's election and explained that she was resigning from her duties out of respect for the decision of the Supreme Court of Appeal, of which she is a judge. In Lesotho, following Thomas Thabani's resignation, the new Prime Minister, Mokwetsi Majoro, unveiled his cabinet on Thursday, appointing as his Minister of Defense and National Security a loyalist of his predecessor. Mr. Majoro gave the key portfolio to Prince Malie, Thomas Thabani's ally and former Public Works Minister. The head of government also brought back 3 other ministers from Thabani's cabinet. In Burundi, following Wednesday's general elections, including a presidential election, the leader of the main opposition party, Agathon Rwasa, described the results granting the ruling party's candidate a crushing victory as fantasy after state media announced the partial results from 12% of municipalities on Thursday. Mr. Rwasa denounced cheating and unrealistic results, claiming that tallies done at polling stations on Wednesday night clearly showed that his party, the National Congress for Liberty, had the lead over the ruling party, the National Council for the Defense of Democracy, and its front-runner candidate, Evariste Ndayishimiye. The Electoral Commission early on Thursday had called on Burundians to remain calm, saying that it will take several days for the results to be available, and warned against reading into early and incomplete results. In Benin, after the publication by the Electoral Commission this Thursday of provisional results of the communal elections of the 17th of May, 2 political parties, led by President Patrice Talon, emerged victorious from the polls. The Progressive Union and the Republican Bloc won about 80% of the 1,815 communal councillor seats to be filled in the country's 77 communes. The turnout was about 50% despite fears about the spread of the coronavirus pandemic and the opposition's calls to boycott the election. The Kori Forces for an Emerging Benin, the only opposition party who was in the running, won 260 seats, while the 2 other parties that took part in the election won 0 seats. In Egypt, the government agreed on Thursday to resume negotiations with Sudan and Ethiopia regarding the filling of the reservoir of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, a controversial mega dam that Addis Ababa has been building on the Blue Nile River since 2011, despite tensions between all 3 Nile countries. The agreement will have to take into account Egypt's water interests as well as those of Ethiopia and Sudan, according to the Egyptian authorities. Cairo's decision comes after Sudanese Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok and his Ethiopian counterpart Abiy Ahmed held a virtual meeting on Thursday to reach an agreement. Their discussion came after Addis Ababa said it would no longer delay the filling of its mega dam, which will become the largest hydroelectric power plant in Africa when completed. On the economic front in Rwanda, the authorities announced earlier this week that the country would experience its slowest growth since the 1994 genocide due to the coronavirus pandemic. The growth rate for the 2020 fiscal year is expected to be 2% against 9% in 2019. The government therefore planned to increase the national budget by 7.5% during the 2020-2021 fiscal year by borrowing about $820 million from foreign investors. The government is also counting on financial support coming from expected donors, which will represent about 15% of the national budget. However, the economic activity will resume in 2021 with a rebound of 6.3% and 8% in 2022, according to the Ministry of Finance. In Senegal, the coronavirus pandemic turned one of the country's tourism hotspots, the seaside resort of Sali, near Dakar, into a ghost town. Tourists have deserted the resort due to travel restrictions, to the detriment of hotel companies.
L'hôtel est fermé.
The hotel is closed. We are obliged to commit our staff to routine maintenance so that the bedding does not get damaged, to aerate and clean, and that costs money. These are extra costs that we have to bear, and it is not always obvious. We don't have the cash for that. We hadn't prepared for that. It's an economic disaster, simply, whose consequences are not measurable today. I hope it doesn't last very long. Very long means that in 2 months at the most, we'll have to find an alternative solution.
Other workers also lament the lack of customers in the usually very busy area.
There's really nothing here. You see, the village is there. Only 5 or 6 people come. They just come to sit and try to do something, so they don't sit at home and do nothing. That's why they come, but not because there are clients or anything else. There are no customers here. The craft village has become a ghost village. Very ghostly, because nothing works. Everything is closed. We are really on special leave. We don't do anything here anymore. Nothing. Nothing honestly works.
Senegalese tourism minister Alioune Sarr announced last week that about 3.6 billion CFA francs, or $6 million US, had been granted as a loan to companies of the tourism value chain to face the economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic. In Tanzania, President John Magufuli announced on Thursday the reopening of universities and the return of sports competitions from the 1st of June, after assuring that the pandemic was in sharp decline, to the great displeasure of his opponents.
All universities and from 6 classes who are planning to sit for their final year exam will open from the 1st of June 2020.
The decision whether to open schools or not should be guided by evidence, by scientific evidence, and we don't have that scientific evidence. So I'm very worried that President Magufuli is so in a hurry to bring the situation back to normal, regardless of the cost of lives that those decisions might cause to Tanzanians.
The main opposition party accuses President Magufuli of minimizing the severity of the coronavirus pandemic, especially since it has been 3 weeks since the government updated the total number of COVID-19 cases in the country.
As a country, we have to share information with the global organizations, like the UN-based organization like WHO and the likes. And we are not sharing this information. We are treating this disease, the viruses, as a security issue rather than a public health pandemic. And it is wrong.
Since the 29th of April, the opposition has been claiming in vain an assessment of the situation and fears that it will have an impact on the parliamentary and presidential elections scheduled for this year.
If the situation goes as it is, and Tanzanian government continues to behave the way it is behaving, it means that the turnout of the election will be very low, because people will be afraid to go out to vote. The campaigns will be affected massively because of the large gatherings on the campaign. I don't know if no sensible person will allow what has happened in Burundi, where you have massive rallies while the pandemic is still existing.
President Magufuli ordered the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Finance on Thursday to prepare for the reopening of universities, accompanied by the release of education loans. In Botswana, the government lifted the lockdown on Wednesday evening in the country's capital, Gaborone. Normal life resumed on Thursday after a 48 days confinement imposed in the country to stem the progression of the coronavirus. However, mask wearing is mandatory in the public space, and travel between the other provinces of the country remain prohibited until further notice. Botswana has officially registered 29 cases of COVID-19 infection, including 19 recoveries and 1 fatality. Finally, on the football scene, the organizers of the 2022 FIFA World Cup pledged on Wednesday to hold an affordable tournament in their country, Qatar, amid fears of a post-coronavirus pandemic global recession.
Definitely one concern is the economic impact and how it affects the individual. We've always said from day one, this will be an affordable tournament. We want anybody who wants to come to the World Cup to be able to come. We're still committed to ensuring that we create a balance between an affordable World Cup or a price range which is affordable for the fans, and at the same time a price range that is workable, that's functional for the industry, for the service providers, for the supply chain within that's in charge or responsible for delivering the World Cup. That I think is one of my for the time being one of the concerns that we have.
Hassan,
The head of the organizing team chooses to remain optimistic regarding the most prestigious football championship scheduled for late November until mid-December 2022.
But I believe by 2022, I'm optimistic that we would have overcome this pandemic as a human race collectively. I'm optimistic that we will come out of this more resilient as a human race, and it'll be an opportunity for all of us to celebrate. It'll be one of the early opportunities for all of us to celebrate together. Suffering the illegal blockade that was imposed on us about 3 years ago, it was a blessing in disguise to a large extent, because it forced us to be self-reliant. It forced us to look inwards. It's forced us to become much more resilient and much more self-reliant and much more effective. And which made us much better prepared to deal with COVID as it came along.
Qatar has been continuing its preparations for the World Cup despite the spread of the coronavirus pandemic. That's it for today. Thank you for watching Vox News.